Okay. All right. I think we're live now. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you and welcome to What's Privacy Got to Do with It? This is the TLC Group's community live stream show, which we're doing in partnership with Abacus Limited. My name is Tahira Lovell. I'm the CEO of the TLC Group of Companies. We're a data protection and cybersecurity training and consultancy firm. We have offices, or I should say, we have virtual offices in Bermuda, UK, Barbados, and Trinidad. I'm joined as well here by Lennox Cumberbatch. I'll give him a few moments to introduce himself as well.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. As Sierra said, I'm Leonis Cumberbatch, and I'm here representing Abacus Limited. We are a local accounting firm here in the beautiful island of Bermuda. We offer accounting services to local companies, local small, medium-sized entities of any nature. And our services include bookkeeping, accounting, payroll, CFO, and operational advisory services. For me, myself, I've been here in Bermuda for over a decade, quite long. I've previously worked in the Caribbean, having worked with a regional company. I've worked in Barbados, Trinidad, and Jamaica. And basically, I have been involved in government, private enterprise, and in various internal and external accounting and auditing capacities.
Wow, that's amazing. So you have a lot of wealth of knowledge when it comes to operations, especially those back-end processes that in organizations are key and often have a lot of personal data. So we're really great to have you join us and help share some information about some operational best practices that organizations can possibly undertake to ensure that they're looking at data protection and privacy best practices. So thanks again, Lennox. So, what's privacy got to do with it? You may be wondering what is this about? We really appreciate you joining. We're going to be having these shows every quarter, and it's really to be able to provide some good advice. In this time where a lot of people are looking for information, this can be used as a tool for organizations and individuals who have an interest in data protection or may have compliance or regulatory role in the organization. We really hope that the information we share will be beneficial to yourselves and your organization. So, the very first show we're doing is called Starting a Data Diet. Now, you may be wondering, it's Wednesday, a couple of days before Good Friday. And, it may not be the best time to start to think about a diet, especially if you're anything like me and you love chocolate and Easter eggs. But of course, organizations always have to be aware of the amount of information they're collecting. But before we get started with that, I just have a burning question for you, Lennox, okay? And this is going to determine how well we're going to get along for the next hour. So your
So,
hot cross buns, is it raisins, no raisins, and is it icing or no icing?
raisins, no icing. The
Raisins, no.
raisins add a little sweetness, the icing add too much sweetness. So, raisins, no icing.
And I am the exact opposite. I don't like raisins, but I love icings.
So, we're
So
balanced.
we're balanced, and that's great, and that's really what this show is about. That it shows from the regulatory side of data
Yes.
protection and cybersecurity, but then organizations have to put this in place, and that's all about the operations, and that's where your experience is great to have some knowledge and to give some advice about
Yeah.
that. Okay,
Correct. And
so
where operations come in as well is
mhm,
that you really need a smooth operation to ensure that your data is protected. Where
mhm.
you don't have an operation that's running smoothly, there's so much things um, that can occur to expose your data to people who are not supposed to be seeing it.
Oh, of course. And we see those things like that happening every day. There's news of a data breach or news of a cyber incident that may have occurred in an organization. And unfortunately, a lot of it does sometimes go back to operational processes and procedures and what people are doing in organizations. So again, we really encourage you guys that are watching, whether it's live or on the replay. that you sign up. We'll have some registration details at the end where you will be regularly notified when we're doing these live streams, as well as we've got a little treat, which we'll talk about towards the end of this show. All right, so data diet or data minimization, what does that mean? I think I'll start off just sort of giving an overview of what that means from a legislative perspective. So, data protection legislations, many jurisdictions, including the EU's, with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. The UK has a Data Protection Act. Bermuda has PIPA or PIPA, depending how you want to pronounce it. Barbados, the US, they have data protection from sort of a regional level or state level. So, California has a CCPA, New York has one. So, again, it really depends on the jurisdiction what regulations they've put into place. But the common theme is they have different principles that most legislations do have incorporated into the regulation. And one of those is what's called data minimization. So, what does that mean? Right? So let's talk about it from what the legislation says, and then I'll just give you sort of more of an overview of what it is as a operational side. So the data minimization principle under GDPR is that personal data shall be adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. Okay. Now, Bermuda's Piper has something very similar, the wording slightly different, but it still has the same context, which is an organization shall ensure that personal information is adequate, relevant, and not excessive in relation to the purposes for which it is used. So, what that basically means is, as an organization, you should be determining why you're collecting that data, what actual information you need to do the service or provide the product, and then are you not collecting it and keeping it for an excessive length of time? Okay, so we'll talk about that as we go through in a little bit more detail. But basically, it's to prevent people from just saying, I want everything. I'm just going to collect as much information as I can. And I'm sure you've experienced this, Lennox, with forms. You're just trying to sign up to get something, to get a white paper. They ask you your name, address, email. They may ask you, company's size of company, turnover. Like, really, do you need all of that information when I just need you to send me something by email? So is it that you just need my email address? Or even on HR, application forms. At the very beginning, is it necessary for an individual to give all of the information when it's likely that they may not be hired? You see what I mean? So,
Yeah.
in your experience, what type of examples do you have where you may have seen information where that was just they were collecting too much, or it wasn't necessary to collect quite so much information?
Well, in regards to payroll, we do a lot of payroll for a lot of different businesses. And we find that HR departments, they collect a lot of
Mm-hmm.
information that we don't necessarily need to process payroll. Now, the HR department might need that information for various references, but does the payroll department really need it? No, they don't. The payroll department basically needs information in order to process the correct pay, and
Mm-hmm.
that's it. So that's another thing, Tiara. Who should have what information? An organization may be collecting a lot of information, but all the departments don't necessarily need to have all of that information. Depending on what your department is doing, the information that you get should be limited to that. So can you talk a little bit about, who should have what information and how should organization put limits on who sees what?
That is awesome, Lennox, that you bring that up, because data minimization just isn't about the amount of data you're collecting. It's also about reducing who should have access to it. And that has everything to do with access controls. Now, an access control could be something physical. So, people in HR, they're not necessarily spread out all over the organization, right? They may have a room or a section of a floor because their information is quite sensitive or high risk data that they're possibly collecting. So they may have restrictions. They may have locked cabinets and things like that to prevent the access to that information. But a lot of times we don't necessarily put as stringent access controls on the electronic data. So, yes, someone in HR, sure, they may need to have access to see medical records, disciplinary actions, and things like that. But as you rightly acknowledged, does someone in payroll need to have that access? So, organizations need to look at not just the physical data, but also the electronic data. And just because you work for the organization, that doesn't necessarily give you, or shouldn't necessarily give you the right to have access to all of the information. And even, for customer records, a customer service representative, do they need to see the billing information if they're purely just dealing with, complaints or inquiries and things like that? So organizations should be looking at the systems that they're using to see if they can restrict controls around access, as well as role-based access, perhaps, and making sure that only those individuals who should have access and need access are able
That's
to
right.
see that information. So that's a great point, Lennox. Another thing with the mirror test is, how do you know if your organization's collecting too much information? How do you know when you have what we call data overload, or you've got just there's insufficient controls over the data in the organization? What are some of the things? I mean, you've talked about your wide international experience. Obviously, as a third party or service provider, you're in and out of different clients. What are some of the things that you pick up and you're like, there could be an issue or a challenge here?
Well, one of the things that we really go by is a lot of organizations that we work with, they're audited organizations. And there's legislation in place to state how long you should maintain financial data. In a lot of jurisdictions, like here in Bermuda, that is 7 years.
Hmm.
And sometimes we go into organizations, and not just organizations I work with now with Abacus, but prior organizations. And I find they had information from the time I was born. Really, do you
Yeah.
really need that information from way back then? And then another thing is not that they have the information, it's how they have it stored. The information is stored in a back room where people often peruse. Anybody can access this room. Now, there's no physical controls over who have access. So at the end of the day, that personal information can be seen by anybody in the organization. So those are some
Hmm.
of the red flags that we look at when we're looking at processes in regards to information collection, information retention, and as we will speak to a little later, information deletion.
Okay. I know the next topic we'll be looking at is diet goals, but before we go there, I just wanted to just sort of put some frame of how the data access happens, right? So it's normally, a company just over time, they've been growing, adding new employees, adding new services and products. It could be due to lack of training. And that obviously comes sometimes with that growth, that rapid growth, where the organization's so busy trying to meet their consumer need, that they're not necessarily always paying attention to some of those in-house processes. And then just a changing market environment. So, and I know no one wants to hear it, but of course, COVID changed everything, right? But a lot of organizations, because of COVID, they really changed how they used information. They changed how they worked. So, now that we're, sort of getting into sort of business as usual, organizations now are saying, okay, well, hey, we don't really need to have all of those paper files because we've got most of our information in the cloud and people are able to access that information from home. So what are we doing now with all of this data that we have, maybe in filing cabinets and offsite storage and things like that? As you mentioned, there are some regulatory requirements that, you say you have to keep data for a certain amount of time. But when information is no longer required or there's no legal basis for keeping that data, organizations really should be looking at, secure disposal and deletion of it. So it's very easy for organizations to get into data overload. But again, it's just having the mirror test is really just assessing, looking at the physical, looking at electronic, looking at your processes of how you got here and where you would like to go in the future. And that's where we start to talk about our data diet goals, right? Singular focus, one thing at a time. So, I don't know about you, Lennox, but I've been on my fair share of diets in my day, and normally the ones that worked really well is when I had a goal. I had a best friend's wedding. So I had to fit my bridesmaid's dress. Or there may have been a summer holiday that I was working towards. Organizations, when they're doing really what's a wholesale change sometimes in how they use information, it's adopting a single focus. You can't bite off everything all at once, right? You want to attack the problem one issue at a time. So we really encourage organizations to do a singular focus or pick one goal that you're using for your data diet. So you've done your mirror tests, right? You've looked in the mirror, you've seen what is the problem, and now you want to put things in place. There are three sort of key areas when it comes to data diet goals that we encourage organizations to look at. Is one is narrow your collection, right? Two, look at how you're managing data. And three, deletion, strategic deletion. So let's get started with the narrowing of data collection. I touched on it very briefly at the beginning when I talked about forms, right? We all to just to sign up to go to see my doctor now. Because of COVID now, you have to go. There's an app. I've got to go on this app, put in all this information, and then they'll let me know when my appointment is, right? Some of that information they're asking, I don't think is required at the time that I'm actually booking my appointment. So, as organizations are collecting data, particularly your type of organization, what are some of the things you're seeing, or what are some of the ways that you encourage your clients to perhaps narrow how much data that they're either providing to you or that they're ultimately collecting?
Well, one of these things that I have experience with is I work with an organization that collected a lot of data in regards to payment information,
Mm,
banking and credit card information. And we were the organization was implementing this new system. And one of the things that we did is that we investigated whether or not we need to hold this banking information on our server, on our database.
mm-hmm,
What we found out is that no, we don't. We can actually outsource that to an expert firm. The system that we were implementing actually had a process where they could encrypt this data for us. And what we decided to move forward with is that yes, we would process the payments, but we're not going to hold payment information. And that significantly reduced the
mm-hmm,
chances of the information being or a data breach occurring through us because the organization had the expertise really to protect this data, and they had way more expertise than we did. So we felt safer that our clients, our customers' information was adequately protected, being it was being held by those experts.
Yes, for sure. I think that's brilliant that your organization adopts that. Quite often, service providers, the clients sort of just say, well, this is what I need you to do. And some service providers just do it. But it's great that you guys have a proactive approach to really having that relationship and keeping your customers keeping them in mind, and making sure that you're giving the best possible service to them. And it's not just because we're here to do your payroll, we're here to help you with accounting or HR and things like that. That you're actually thinking outside the box and really ensuring that that information is safe and protected. Also, with narrowing data collection, some organizations have looked to e-forms. So you've seen the forms, paper forms, right? You may, and I'll use the doctor's office again as an example. You go in and you fill out the form, your name, address, date of birth, rates. Um, they do the, all these different personal medical histories. I don't know about you, but for me, mine doesn't change that often, right? So if I'm going to my doctor, my doctor now has a tablet. So when I go there, instead of having a form where, I have to fill it out manually, it gets photocopied or scanned and all this stuff. There is a tablet. I go in, it shows my last history. and I just approve whether if anything has changed. That is a much better way sometimes for collecting data, where you're putting the responsibility back to the individual, and you're also ensuring that you're not over duplicating data, because that's a big thing that organizations sometimes encounter. You get one form, and that form may have the payroll data on it. It has the HR history on it. It's got medical history on it. Who gets it? If it's paper based, you've got to either make a scan or you've got to photocopy it multiple times and hand it to all the different departments that require it. So again, looking at how you're actually how information is being ingested or collected by your organization could be one of the focuses that your organization wants to start with. Just sort of saying, stop. Let's minimize what we're taking in our efforts to meet the data minimization principle. The
So,
next one,
Tiara, I want to
oh
ask you
yeah,
a question. There are
sure.
a lot of organizations now, because of COVID, they
Hmm.
actually request information before you actually get physically to their offices or
Hmm.
their place of work. Um, so, how does that impact data collection and the ability of them to protect your data? Because you're either sending it over email or you're completing a form online.
Hmm.
So, how does that really impact data
Well,
protection?
the sending of personal information, especially sensitive information over emails, just a plain email by default with no security, is a taboo. A lot of organizations still do it, but you really need to look at other methods. There's secure email, there's encrypted emails. But one of the things that we really promote as the TLC group is the use of portals. So, as a customer or as an employee, there is a portal that you can go to and upload that information. So you're not sending it over a traditionally unsecure channel, such as an email, as well as it's a single point of access. So we don't have that data duplication, as well as you can put additional security around portals, more so than an email. Suppose you've sent the email and the person that received it accidentally forwarded it on to someone else. Just because maybe your name was Jane Smith and they have three Jane Smiths in their contacts and they've accidentally forwarded it to the wrong Jane Smith. So portals are a great way for what we call progressive data management around making sure that information is up to date and accurate, as well as it's being limited to who should have access to it. So, yeah, that's a good comment there, Lennox, that you raised that question, because portals really we see as a way to go for a lot of organizations to help with their data management. And then finally, strategic deletion. So we've an organization may start with narrowing data collection. Then they're starting to look at, well, how are we managing data? Can we do the portals? Can we look at reducing our offsite storage? Now, what happens when that information is no longer needed? I'm sure you have come into organizations where there's that filing cabinet in the back, right? Where everything that's just, we may need it just in case it sits there. No one really goes into the archive room. We don't even know if it's past the point of compliance because there's no notification, there's no process to monitor, there's no retention schedule that people are following. So strategic deletion is one of the key aspects as a data diet goal that organizations can also look towards. Um, with your organization, what do you do when your clients are no longer a client? How do you manage your offboarding process?
Well, part of our process is actually, and we have been over the last couple of years, we have been trying to reinforce it, is that we return data after the fiscal year is complete. So the data and this is pre-COVID, I should say, because if you come to our offices right now, you would absolutely see empty filing cabinets. We don't
Wow.
keep hard copy of any
Hmm.
client files. Pre-COVID, we did have a couple hard copies, but at the end of the year, we do a data diet. We
Hmm.
pack up all of the year that just complete the fiscal year. We pack that all up in boxes or whatever, or we have a guardian box as well. We would put it in the guardian box, which is protected by lock and key if it's not needed by the client. the data is needed by the client to maintain for 7 years. We would transport that back to the client, and a lot of our clients would have the ability to store that data
Mm-hmm.
securely. So in our filing cabinets here in the office, you would see probably if you come in right after year end, you would see current year data and probably prior year data. That's it. Anything older than that, you will not find in our cabinets. But just let me make something very clear. We are not talking about a data diet similar to what Enron did. Now, that
Oh,
was an
tell us about
unnecessary
that.
data.
Let's remind some people who may not have heard about it or have forgotten about that. I remember that episode, but sure, let's talk about that briefly.
Right. So with the Enron situation, um, because of some various practices that the auditors um, were implementing, basically their results were not being audited accurately. And
Mm-hmm.
when the SEC got word of this, then they started to shred. I mean, the shredder was their number one tool, and they shredded information that was necessary. But what they were trying to do, they were trying to cover up things that were happening. So we're not talking about that kind of diet at all,
Mm-hmm.
because we know what happened post Enron. It brought down Enron itself, and it brought down a major accounting firm. So we're not talking about getting rid of data that you need for legal purposes or regulatory purposes, basically.
Okay, yeah, that is very important when we talk about strategic deletion. I've also had an experience with an organization where they took on a data minimization project, and there was one administrator who was very keen to get rid of data, not for those purposes like Enron, but just because she was really, she had taken this data minimization principle on board. However, when we talk about data deletion and disposal, it's not just, well, let's just get rid of it, right? You need to be strategic. And in this particular instance, they actually ended up throwing away or shredding and disposing of the shareholder certificates from the founders,
Wow.
because it happened to be in a little, a box, and the box was marked old files or something like that. And no one actually took the time to go through and read what was in this box. So again, strategic deletion doesn't just mean throwing away paper, throwing away data, deleting databases. You really want to be strategic. Make sure you have, you've met any compliance, regulatory needs. That you also look at the vital and critical needs for the organization, because shareholder certificates are an important part of an organization's process. So again, making sure that you're looking at the data and what it is that you're actually disposing of, because you don't want to dispose of information that you ultimately end up needing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where process comes into play as
Hmm.
well, because with a documented process that clearly outlines what you should be doing in terms of collecting, retaining, and deleting data,
Hmm.
it really avoid errors like that happening, because I'm sure that particular employee um, may not have intentionally deleted that data, but if she had some sort of guidance in terms of a process of
Hmm.
how I should be getting rid of data and what data I should be getting rid of and what data I should be maintaining, probably the probability of that error being avoided would have been high.
Yes, for sure. And of course, that's processes. As much as you can, automate them. So a lot of electronic systems, you can set up triggers that let you know, okay, hi, we've had this amount of data, it's past the 7 years or 5 years or 20 years, whatever trigger you set, that can do that. As well as manual, there's retention schedules, making sure that you have an information asset register. So you know what information, where it is, and that you've identified exactly what happens when that retention has passed. So yeah, that's great information there, Lennox, about processes and procedures. And of course, that's because of your strong operational background there.
That's it.
If it doesn't have a procedure, it doesn't exist, right?
That's what we say as accountants.
Yes, there you go. All right, so now let's look at kickboxers, kickbusters. So as an organization, we're sort of taking you on the journey of a data diet today. So we've done the mirror test, you've identified what your problems and challenges are. You've got your goal, you've started to work towards it, whether that's narrowing your data collection, looking at how you're managing data, and then also your deletion and disposal processes. But after a while, you quite often you get comfortable. You might get tired. Some event may happen, and it just changes things, and your team may not feel, or they may not be carrying out the processes as an organization that you've actually implemented. So here we're just going to talk briefly about some kickbusters that your organization or as an individual, if you have responsibility for data privacy and protection and security in your organization. Some things you can do to sort of get people back on track, right? Because this is really the people element, because the technology will do what it's supposed to do. The systems will do what they're supposed to do. But we as people, we have habits, we have bad habits and good habits. So here we're just going to talk on a few ways to do that. So one is consumption and exertion changes. So in the world of a physical or meal data diet, you reduce what you put in and you increase what you do, right? So you may eat less or eat differently and exercise more. So how do you kick that? How do you take that up a notch when it comes to a data diet? So once an organization's been through, they've minimized their data, they're looking at ways to increase their adherence to the principle of data minimization. You could have different things like reducing photocopies. I mean, this is, again, the paperless office idea that we all heard about in the 80s, right? That never really came to fruition. Because of COVID, people now don't print as much. The TLC group, as I said, we have virtual offices. We're 100% virtual, which means we don't have a physical presence anywhere. So when I'm working from home, I have a printer. My printer the ink will dry up before I use all of my ink at home on my printer. I just don't print because the processes we have in place don't require a lot of physical or paper data. So organizations can do something similar around just restricting how much photocopies people can do. And I know one organization I worked in, I mean, they had it to the point where it was really strict, but it helped because people sometimes just get slack and they just think, oh, I'll just print it, I'll read it at lunch, or I'll take it home with me and read it later, right? If you only have 50 photocopies to do a week, you're going to be very strategic and think, well, before you press that print, do I really need it? Because in that organization, which is a law firm, which you obviously can imagine has lots of paper, they were just like, we don't need to print everything. We have a system, we have portals. It's no need for people to print so much information. If someone went over their printing limit, they got a call from IT. Hi, what's going on? And again, it just reinforces. So there's sometimes that little gentle nudge that organizations need to do to sort of, when people start to, go back to old ways or old habits.
Yeah.
As well as.
That's a question as well.
Sure. Yeah, no,
Have
that's
you
great.
ever had the experience of working in a big organization? Everyone is using one printer, and you print something, and you go to the printer, and it's not there. Somebody picked that up. Now, that could have been information that person is not supposed to see. Now, in a situation where you're reducing printing, it reduces the probability of that occurring. So people might think, okay, I need hard copies, but really and truly, you don't, because in an instance like that, where everybody's using this one central printer, it really increases the risk of information getting to someone that's not supposed to happen.
Yes, for sure. That still happens. The great thing is there's technology. So a lot of printers today, modern printers, they have release keys or fobs. So you actually have to either put a code in, you have to come with your swipe card or a little key fob and put it up against the printer, and it won't actually release the job until you do that. So again, there's different ways that organizations can manage that, because you definitely don't want a data breach because, Sarah in at reception was just printing off a menu, say for a staff member, and John in accounts had just printed out the dividend payments to all of the shareholders, and now she's got that information and walking around with it, right? Because it got mixed in with her prints. So yeah, no, definitely looking at technology is a great way to help with some of those types of issues around processing, especially for physical printing of information. Also, one of the things, like I said, TLC Group's a virtual team, but we also have a team, at the end of the day. I know Abacus, you guys are sort of hybrid. You have your office, but you also work from home as well or on client sites. How does a team factor into some of those plateau kickbusters? Can you think of some ways that you may have seen or what you do in house to sort of get people motivated when it comes to different changes in behavior?
Well, one of the things that we took on a new IT service provider last year,
Hmm.
and we do a lot of training. We have a lot of cybersecurity training occurring, and it has become sort of a little competition, a motivational competition. Who has the most points for doing the most training? And that has been such a motivator, and you learn so much from doing these sessions. Plus, you get those points to brag about when we have team meetings. Okay, I have done more training, I've gotten more points. So that is one thing we've been doing internally to motivate staff in regards to training and specifically cybersecurity training.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, for the TLC, we have regular meetings, and we always, throw in some sort of data protection, cybersecurity tips, again, just to keep it on the forefront of people's mind. But another way to sort of make sure organizations, when it comes to these plateaus, the champion. So having an individual or team member in a department, in that unit, to actually be looking to see, okay, well, I see that we have, we've had more phishing attempts, successful phishing attempts this week. What's happening? What are people doing? Having those champions in place is a great way to sort of increase that motivation. And I like the fact that you guys use competition. That's a great way for ongoing maintenance, which we'll talk about shortly. But just having an individual or individuals in an organization who's so not so focused, because obviously they'll have other work to do, but they have as one of their key areas of responsibility is to see that the organization is meeting their goals, whether it's data minimization, whether it's compliance with different regulations, as well as training to, of course, make sure that people are reminded regularly that data protection, cybersecurity is not just nice to have, it's a must have for organizations. And then finally, in as a kickbuster, what many organizations, oh, I feel like you were out at sea just now, Lennox. But many organizations suffer from is what we call compliance fatigue, right? And I'm sure you have lots of compliance or regulations that you have to adhere to. Obviously, with the TLC group, we mainly deal with data protection and cybersecurity. But there's, the finance, there's anti-money laundering, there's HR compliance, there's government compliance needs. As organizations, they may just, or individuals with responsibility in those organizations, they may just start to feel tired. How do they address that? Yeah. As an organization, we recommend feedback, regularly getting feedback from the staff. How are they feeling? How are they coping? What could they recommend we do better, do differently? What's been your experience with those types of activities where you're actually actively soliciting feedback from the team to ensure that compliance and regulatory needs are being met?
Well, one of the things that I've seen organizations do is really reverse, sort of a reverse psychology, and say to the employee, okay, how does this impact your job? If we have an employee that is not too concerned with meeting regulatory standards or compliance standards, then you reverse it and you said, okay, if we don't meet these standards, um, maybe you don't have a job at the end of the day, because if there's a breach, the company might have to close down, or operational downtime will be large, which means it's going to impact the bottom line, and that could mean you don't have a job at the end of the day. I mean, that is sort of reverse psychology, but then there are also ways to motivate staff to keep up to date with all of the different standards, and not just keep up to date with the standards, but also abide by the standards in
Mhm.
their day-to-day operations.
Sure. One great way for what we call beating that compliance fatigue
Hmm.
is to regularly introduce something new. So remember back in when we talked about diet girls, a singular focus. Once you've sort of gotten a good handle and you've got good things in place, move on to the next. And then once you've accomplished those goals, circle back, because now you may have found different ways, or there's been a new perspective across the organization of the importance of that. So, just doing something new in the diet world, trying a new exercise in the data diet or data minimization. It could be okay, well, we've had company meetings, we've got a newsletter, we've presented that. How about doing some fun workshops, some tabletop exercises to really again drive home some of that practical, this is what happens if this occurs, right? Which touches on your point of that data breach. Take them through what could happen under some legislations, including Bermuda's Piper. There's personal liability for breaches, a financial liability, as well as possible a jail time. So, again, as individuals, we want to ensure that we are following our organization's guidelines. And then, as organizations and business leaders, we need to make sure that we're giving our staff, our team, the right tools and motivations they need to keep it going as they continue on a data protection journey, which takes us quite nicely, I guess, into our next section, which is maintenance, right? So again, as I said, an organization, they did their goals, they've met all the goals that they have set out. Some organizations, they tie it into their vision or to their overall strategic goal. So an organization may say we want to see increased revenues. How can we tie that in to, or increase profits, I should say? How can we tie that into data minimization? One of the key factors is paper, right? Paper costs. Every piece of paper you buy, those reams of paper have a cost attached. Paper has a cost attached as well when you print it. Paper has a cost for storage. Paper has a cost for using. Because imagine how many times, if you have a paper based system, someone actually has to get up from their desk, physically walk over, get that piece of paper, take it back to their desk. Then they have to go and return it back to the desk again, to the storage or the filing cabinet, right? So you can see where an organization could tie in data minimization to that overall. Most organizations have a profit goal, right? How can you see that possibly being used for ongoing maintenance, you think, Lennox?
Well, we can also tie into because if there's a data breach, one of the impacts of a data breach is actually loss in terms of your clients might lose trust in
Mm-hmm.
you, and they might go elsewhere. Now, that directly impacts revenue. Going
Mm-hmm.
back to what you just said, it impacts that bottom line. If I don't feel secure in giving a particular organization my information because I think it's going to be exposed to people who don't need it or want to use it maliciously, I'm going to go to a competing organization that I have confidence in. So it impacts your bottom line at the end of the day. Um, so these are some of the things that we really got to look at when we're trying to motivate employees to first reduce the amount of data that they're holding, which directly impacts the possibility of data breach occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And it is definitely, I think, you have to give those nudges as well as give rewards. But there's also sometimes, you do have to use the stick. For some organizations. Unfortunately, when you have a team or particular individuals who are just not getting with the program, um, this is where we go back again. Even in maintenance, you can use those champions. So there's champions that help you to again keep the motivation or keep the spirits high to achieve those goals. Can also be used for ongoing maintenance. So a champion, they could be there to help identify where there are issues, because the quicker issues are identified or the risks are identified, the quicker you can actually get to a place where they're being looked at and reviewed and solutions being put in place to overcome them. So yeah, definitely when it comes to maintenance, you want to look at that people, that team factor. And then of course, who doesn't like a reward, right? You talked about some of the competition that you guys do within your organization. Rewards can be sometimes financial. It could also sometimes be just having, some organizations may do a half day, or they may do an away day for the department that's doing the best when it comes to data protection and cybersecurity. What are some other rewards that you may have seen in different organizations? Not necessarily just to do with obviously data protection, but there are different ways that you can motivate people to help with this. So, what are some of the other things you may have seen in your engagements?
Well, you get assigned to less complex clients.
Okay.
Don't let me say less complex clients, but the easier clients to deal with.
Hmm.
You might be able to say, okay, I don't want to work on a particular client because that particular client is challenging, and they make my hair go gray. So that might be a reward to look forward to. But on a serious note, as you said, rewards are very important because at
Hmm.
the end of the day, it is a way to motivate people to really do what they need to do. And it's whether it be a reward of of a lunch or a gift certificate.
Hmm.
I know ladies in particular like makeup and that sort of stuff. I think one of the things that my president used to do prior to me is that every summer, um, there's because the firm was all ladies, she would take the ladies to a spa day. That is a type of reward as well, and
Hmm.
that can be implemented for showing interest in data privacy and adhering to processes and controls, or just a reward for working hard, basically.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
I've also seen some organizations, they would have, because my background is mainly in cybersecurity as well as data protection. So they used to have phishing. So any team member who actually successfully identified a phishing email and forwarded it, so they used to have a little button that you could click, sorry, and it would say this is a phishing email. And if the person who did that the most, they actually used to have a little phishing champion trophy, right? And that individual would be able to make a charitable donation. I think it was £50 or something to the charity of their choice. And they used to do that every month. And people were getting really competitive because they used to have an internal intranet where you could just go on and see who's clicked the most phishing
Scores.
emails, right? Scores. So gamification is another way to again keep that ongoing maintenance in place, and making sure that people are motivated and are driven to accomplish the goals. Next, we want to talk about compliance and regulatory changes. I know that as a accounting and operations service provider, there are a number of compliance and regulatory um, legislations that you have to adhere to, not just for yourselves but also your clients. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you keep up to date, or how Abacus keeps up to date with some of those changes and making sure that they're aware of what's going on in the industry?
One, we most of our accountants are qualified accountants. We are a part of the CPA Bermuda. We're members, and
Okay.
CPA Bermuda is that body really that has a lot of information in regards to regulatory compliance for us as accountants, and we keep abreast of that. They send out newsletters. They send out updates on different standards as well, accounting standards. So we keep abreast of that. Some of our organizations that we work with, they have regulatory compliance coming out of, let's say, the BMA here in Bermuda, which I think would be the equivalent of, let's say, the central bank in Barbados. So they put on various seminars um, to update member firms on, what is required and what changes have occurred. And a lot of the bigger accounting firms here that a lot of people will be familiar with, the international firms, the KPMGs, the EYs, the Pricewaterhouse, they put on a lot of seminars throughout the year. And we use those as opportunities to get updated on items that we might not particularly have the expertise in that particular area of accounting. So we attend a lot of seminars throughout the year. Some people might see seminars as, a waste of time or a way to get away from work, but really it's not that. It's getting knowledge that you can apply to your work and apply to the services that we are offering our clients.
Yes, that's for sure. Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah, it
When
is.
it comes to maintenance and ongoing compliance, making sure that you're, keeping your ear to the ground, attending those seminars, webinars. A lot of the legislations around data protection and cybersecurity, different organizations, they will have regular feedbacks. They may have a seminar asking for feedback on, how their organization is doing. You can have community network groups to, again, sort of share that knowledge, best practices, right? Because that's really what it is. It's a practice. It's not something that, there's a magic bullet when it comes to data protection and cybersecurity. It really is about ongoing development, continuous maintenance in an organization. So I think we sort of come towards the end of the data diet journey. So before we go into an opportunity for questions, I just wanted to recap to make sure that individuals remember or have some key things to take away when it comes to data minimization. So, firstly, again, is doing your mirror test, looking around, seeing what it is in your organization that may be the issue, maybe the challenges. Then, doing your data diet goals, choosing one at a time to address and get into place. Then, going on to looking at your plateaus, how you can, where you see ways that you can keep people motivated, technologies you can put in place to possibly reduce friction when it comes to data minimization. And then finally, ongoing maintenance when it comes to the issues around data minimization and making sure that your organization and individuals with responsibility are doing their part to help keep our information safe, right? Because it is ours. The data protection is all about the individual. It's not just about an organization. It really is about you, me, everyone who we trust organizations with our data. And we hope that they are doing their part to ensure that it's being kept safe. Okay.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, sorry. Did you have something, Lennox, before we get
Yeah,
into
I
questions?
just wanted to add, and just to follow up, processes and operational
Hmm.
processes, you need to have those in place to address the where, the who, the why, the when, so that you can minimize the possibility of data breaches, and employees and managers are fully aware of what's necessary for
Hmm.
them to adhere to. Yeah.
No, for sure. And when we say processes, just really briefly, we're not just talking about verbal processes, right?
Mhm. No, we're not. We're talking about, I mean, most organizations will have documented processes,
Mhm.
but there are some processes that are really, they're not documented. There might be something that people have been doing as a best practice, really, that you adhere to. It might not be documented in your organization, but it might be a best practice that is widely known for your particular industry. So we're also talking about those sort of operational procedures as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, One question that we did have come through was around payroll, and the use of payroll data in organizations and how that could be minimized. Did you want to just talk briefly about that?
Yes, so payroll data, which is considered financial data, one of the regulatory requirements is that you maintain that data for 7 years. That is here in Bermuda. It might be a little different in different jurisdictions, but I recommend that you really look at your particular act or legislation in your jurisdiction to determine what is necessary in terms of retaining payroll data and
Hmm.
what payroll data as well is needed to be maintained.
Sure. And when we talk about maintaining that data or retaining that data for those 7 years, um, does that mean that they should just stick it in a filing cabinet or it's just sitting up on a server or a cloud system somewhere? What should organizations be making sure that they are doing well while they're holding on to that data? So they may not be using it.
Mhm.
What should they be doing to make sure that they are keeping that data safe?
Well, what is really key is that that data is being protected because most human resource or payroll data is personal information. And personal information we know is the big ticket item when it comes to phishing and that sort of stuff. So protecting that data, keeping it in encrypted files, physically, people might not see this as a big deal, but physical security is so
Hmm.
critical, especially when you have those papers or application forms people would have completed with name, numbers, parents. That data can be used to access personal finances and that sort of information. So you want to physically keep that data restricted and limited access to only those people who really need to access that data and not the entire organization.
Sure, thanks. I just saw a comment come through from Maria. Thank you very much for that, Maria. We really, again, we're going to do these every quarter. So the next one will be in June. We will be having a registration page, which will be coming up, I believe, shortly. The link to that. So if you are interested in learning more about data privacy for businesses, your organization, or you as an individual, right? Remember, I talked about that individual piece. You have rights. You can ask organizations what they're doing with your data, how they're protecting it, and how long they're keeping it, and things like that. So we really encourage you to, spread the word. Tell your friends about this community live stream show that we're doing in partnership with Abacus. And then finally, the last question I had here was around disposal. You mentioned Guardian, which is on an island, I know, in Bermuda. But many organizations exist to support individuals and organizations with secure disposal, particularly around physical data. And that physical data doesn't just mean paper, it also means the electronics, the actual devices that information is stored. So there are companies that can shred the actual hard drives of your laptops, tablets, the printers. Remember, printers have an internal hard drive as well. So it can actually make sure that there's information. But make sure whatever provider you're using does provide you with a certified certificate of disposal so that you have something to show that that information was securely disposed of. I think we're coming almost up to time. So I just wanted to quickly just wrap up here. For those of you who do sign up for our registration, we have a little sweet treat there over for you. It's not a hot cross bun or a fish cake or a chocolate Easter egg, but we have our 5-step checklist for organizations to ensure that they are keeping that data minimization principle. So if you are one of our members, of the What's Privacy Got to Do with the Community, what we call our Backstage Pass. You'll receive a copy of that by email. So please do go ahead and follow that registration link. If you don't have access to go to the registration link, you can also email solutions at the tlcgroup.pro. And we also obviously have our LinkedIn platform. We have our website, www.thetlcgroup.pro. Abacus, would you like to speak to some of the platforms on how they can reach you as well, Lennox?
Yeah, we are on LinkedIn. We are on Instagram. Well, we're not fully on Instagram. We are also on Facebook, and our website is abacus www.abacus.bm. You can get all the information you need to know about our services and our team on our website. And we also put on various trainings as well. And if you want to be added to our mailing list, you can send an email to info@abacus.bm.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Lennox. Again, the TLC group of companies and Abacus are really working hard to ensure that our clients and the wider community have a good understanding of data privacy protection issues. But we also hope that you've taken away some useful ideas and advice that you can possibly go and implement in your organization. But if you have any questions about data protection and cybersecurity, feel free to get in touch with the TLC group. When it comes to operations, finance, accounting, HR, the list goes on and on of the services that Abacus can offer to some of their clients. Do get in touch. I believe the MailChimp registration link is there now in the comment section. So you can go ahead and click that link and it will go ahead and sign you up. And you'll be sure to get a copy of our 5-step data diet checklist via email. So we really appreciate you. We look forward to welcoming you on our next show of What's Privacy Got to Do with It. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Lennox.